The air in the lawyer's mahogany-panelled office was thick enough to choke on. It smelled of old paper, expensive leather, and the cloying perfume my mother-in-law, Eleanor, wore like armour. She and my brother-in-law, Mark, were seated across from me, their faces a perfect blend of feigned grief and greedy anticipation. They thought this was their moment of triumph, the final act in a play where they inherited the world, and I was written out of the script. The lawyer, a stoic man named Mr. Abernathy, cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the tense silence. He was about to read the last will and testament of my late husband, Richard Sterling. Mark leaned forward, a smug little smile playing on his lips. "Let's get on with it, Abernathy." We all know what Richard wanted. The company stays in the family, with the real family. His eyes flickered towards me, full of disdain. For 10 years, that's all I had ever been to them. An outsider, a temporary fixture, a gold digger they were finally about to discard. I kept my face a placid mask, my hands folded calmly in my lap. I was supposed to be grieving, broken and terrified. They had no idea how wrong they were. Mr. Abernathy adjusted his glasses and began to read. He went through the usual bequests, small sums to distant relatives, donations to charities. Eleanor was practically vibrating with impatience. Then he paused. "And now," he said, looking over his spectacles directly at the two of them, "we come to the matter of Sterling Industries and the controlling shares thereof." This was it. Eleanor sat up straighter, her back as rigid as a steel rod. Mark's smirk widened. Mr. Abernathy continued, "To my mother, Eleanor Sterling, and my brother, Mark Sterling, I leave the sum of $100,000 each, to be paid out over a period of 10 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark's jaw dropped. Eleanor's face went white with shock. "100,000?" she stammered. "That's an insult. There must be a mistake." "There is no mistake," Mr. Abernathy said, his voice firm. He then turned his gaze to me. "As for the remainder of the estate, including all controlling shares and the chairmanship of the board of Sterling Industries, Richard Sterling leaves it all to—" He paused, letting the moment hang in the air before delivering the final blow. He called my name, but not as the grieving widow. "He leaves it to the new chairwoman, Clara Sterling." They thought I was the simple, quiet wife he married out of pity. They had no idea I was the secret architect who had been running his empire from the shadows for the last 5 years. You're probably wondering how a woman they dismissed as a parasite ended up with everything. To understand that, you have to go back to the beginning, to the promise Richard made me, and the hell his family put me through to try and break it. "This is a forgery, a lie." Eleanor's voice, usually so controlled and imperious, was a raw shriek. She shot to her feet, her perfectly manicured hands trembling with rage. "She manipulated him. My son was sick. He wasn't in his right mind. This little nobody bewitched him." Mark was right behind her, his face purple. "We'll contest this. We'll drag her through every court in the country. She won't get a penny, let alone the company." I didn't flinch. I just met their furious glares with a calm, steady gaze and said nothing. Mr. Abernathy slid a document across the table. "I assure you, the will is ironclad. Richard had 3 different psychological evaluations done in the final months to certify his soundness of mind. He knew you would react this way. The diagnosis came 5 years into our marriage, a rare degenerative neurological condition. The doctors said it would be slow, that he would have good days and bad days, but the trajectory was clear. There was no cure. When Richard told his family, I saw something truly monstrous flicker in their eyes. It wasn't grief or even pity, it was opportunity. His illness was, to them, a confirmation of his weakness. And his weakness was Mark's opening. As Richard's energy waned, Mark's aggression grew. He started making bigger moves at the company without consulting Richard, trying to consolidate power. He'd present Richard with complex documents to sign on his bad days, hoping my husband was too fatigued or medicated to read the fine print. Eleanor became a constant, suffocating presence in our home, not to care for her ailing son, but to act as a sentry. She'd question the medications I gave him, criticize the doctors I chose, and tell anyone who would listen that I was isolating him and reveling in the attention. Her narrative was clear. The evil wife was taking advantage of the sick, vulnerable heir. What they didn't know was that in the quiet of the night, when the house was finally still, Richard and I were building our ark. His mind was as sharp as ever, even when his body betrayed him. "They think I'm already gone, Clara," he whispered to me one night, his hand frail in mine. "They're circling like vultures. Mark is going to run Sterling Industries into the ground. My father's legacy, everything we've built. He'll burn it all down for his own ego." That's when our secret partnership began. I became his hands and his voice. He'd spend hours teaching me every facet of the business, from hostile takeovers to patent law, from corporate finance to human resources. I absorbed it all. I would read him reports, and he would dictate emails for me to send from a private anonymous account to loyal executives. I would sit in on conference calls on mute, texting him my observations, and he would relay them as his own. We became a single functioning unit. I remember one night, Mark was about to sign a disastrous deal with a rival company, a deal that would have given them access to our most valuable trade secrets. He was too arrogant to see the trap. From Richard's bedside, I spent 72 hours with almost no sleep, digging through financial statements and public records until I found proof the other company was a shell corporation on the verge of bankruptcy. I compiled a dossier, and through Richard, we funneled it to a board member he trusted. The deal was killed at the 11th hour. Mark was furious and humiliated, never knowing that the woman he called a simpleton was the one who had outmaneuvered him. It was our first major victory, and in that moment, Richard looked at me with a fierce pride in his tired eyes. He knew. He knew I was the only one he could trust to carry the torch. The last year of Richard's life was a siege. His good days became rarer, his body weaker. For Eleanor and Mark, this was the end game. Their strategy shifted from quiet sabotage to a full frontal assault. Their goal was simple: get Richard declared mentally incompetent and seize control through a conservatorship. They saw his fortune and his company as their birthright, and they were determined to take it. They began a campaign to prove I was an unfit caregiver. They'd show up unannounced with their own doctors, demanding to perform on-the-spot evaluations. They'd call Adult Protective Services with anonymous, fabricated tips about elder abuse, forcing me to endure humiliating interviews with social workers. They told Richard's oldest friends that I was keeping him drugged and confused, turning people we'd known for years against us. Every day was a battle, not against the disease, but against the people who were supposed to be his family. The ugliest confrontation happened about 3 months before he passed. They arrived with Mark's personal lawyer, a man with the soul of a shark, and a doctor I'd never seen before. They cornered me in the living room. "Clara, this has gone on long enough," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with false concern. "We are here to help Richard. We're taking over his care." "You are here to try and steal his company," I replied, my voice shaking but firm. "And you will not see him." Mark stepped forward, towering over me. "You don't have a choice. We have a court order for a psychiatric evaluation." He waved a piece of paper in my face. It was a bluff, but a powerful one. For a moment, I felt a surge of panic, but then I looked past them and saw Richard standing in the doorway of his study, holding onto the frame for support. He looked frail, but his eyes were blazing. "Get out of my house," he said, his voice weak but clear as a bell. "Both of you, get out." They were so stunned to see him standing, to hear the authority still in his voice, that they just froze. "And if you ever," he continued, taking a shaky step forward, Threaten my wife again. I will personally see to it that you are written out of the Sterling family history for good." They left, sputtering with rage. That night, Richard told me everything. He had been meeting secretly with Mr. Abernathy for months. He had already undergone the psychological evaluations. He had transferred assets and restructured share ownership. He had built a fortress of legal documents, trusts, and affidavits. He had spent the last of his precious energy not fighting his disease, but fighting his family. He took my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "The will is done, Clara," he said. "My promise is kept. When the time comes, you'll know what to do. Don't be afraid. Just be the woman I always knew you were." Richard passed away peacefully 2 months later, in his own bed, with my hand in his. His last words to me were not a grand declaration, but a simple, whispered, "Thank you." In that quiet moment, there was no company, no fortune, no hateful family, only us. I mourned him deeply, mourning the man he was and the long life we were supposed to have together. My period of quiet grief lasted exactly 12 hours. The next morning, Eleanor and Mark descended upon the house. They didn't come to comfort me, they came to take inventory. They walked through the rooms, discussing which paintings they would keep and which they would sell. Mark was on his phone, barking orders to his assistant to prepare the transition statements for the press. They spoke about Richard in the past tense with chilling ease. To them, his death wasn't a tragedy, it was a transaction that had finally been processed. At the funeral, they stood at the front, accepting condolences as the primary mourners, while I was relegated to the side, a footnote in my own husband's story. Eleanor gave a grand, tearful eulogy about her brilliant son, conveniently omitting the fact that she had tried to have him declared insane. Mark spoke of his duty to carry on his brother's legacy, the same legacy he had been actively trying to destroy for a decade. Their hypocrisy was breathtaking. I endured it all in silence, holding on to Richard's last words to me. "When the time comes, you'll know what to do." Which brings us back to that mahogany-panelled office. As I sat there, listening to Mr. Abernathy's voice drone on, I wasn't the terrified widow they saw me as. I was a soldier waiting for the signal to attack. I knew every word of that will by heart. Richard and I had gone over it dozens of times. We had planned for this moment, for their shock, for their rage. So when Mr. Abernathy said my name, "The new chairwoman, Clara Sterling," and Eleanor's shriek filled the room, I felt no surprise. I felt a deep, profound sense of justice. It was the sound of a promise being fulfilled. While they were screaming about lawsuits and forgeries, I stood up slowly. All the years of being dismissed, insulted, and underestimated were over. The power in the room had shifted, and it was as tangible as the heavy desk between us. I looked at Mark, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. "Mark," I said, my voice perfectly level and cold. "There will be a mandatory emergency board meeting tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. sharp. I suggest you be there." Then I turned to Eleanor, whose mouth was still hanging open in horror. "And Eleanor," I added, "as you are no longer a board member or an employee, your corporate security pass and all company credit cards have just been deactivated. A car will be at your home in an hour to collect the company vehicle." The next morning, I walked through the glass doors of the Sterling Industries headquarters. The lobby was a cavernous space of polished marble and cold steel, designed to make a person feel small. As I crossed the floor, a hush fell. Heads popped up over cubicle walls. Conversations died in an instant. I could feel dozens of eyes on me, and I knew what they were thinking. They saw the quiet, mousy wife their old boss had married, the woman from the tabloids, the charity case-turned-chairwoman. They saw a ghost. They had no idea they were looking at their new queen. When I entered the boardroom on the top floor, they were all there, a jury of stern-faced men in expensive suits, the board of directors. Mark was at the head of the table in the chairman's seat, Richard's seat. He had deliberately taken it to send a message. He smirked as I walked in, a gesture of pure arrogance. "Well, well, look what the cat dragged in," he said, leaning back in the chair. "Clara, so glad you could make it, though I'm afraid your little fantasy is about to end." I ignored him and took a seat at the opposite end of the table. I placed a single, thick, leather-bound folder in front of me and folded my hands. Mark addressed the board. "Gentlemen, this is a farce. My brother was a sick man, unduly influenced by this woman. She has no experience, no education, no right to be in this room. The family's legal team is already contesting the will. For the stability of the company, I propose an immediate vote to install me as interim CEO and chairman until this mess is sorted out." One of the older board members, a man named Henderson, who had been loyal to Eleanor for decades, nodded grimly. "Mark has our full support. We need to protect the company from this obvious power grab." They all murmured in agreement. They thought it was over. They thought they had me cornered. I let the silence settle for a moment before I spoke, my voice calm and clear. "Thank you for your thoughts, gentlemen, but a vote won't be necessary." I opened the folder. "Before you make any decisions, I think you should see something." I slid a document down the polished table to the center of the group. This is the final prospectus for the Omnicorp deal Mark tried to push through 6 months ago, the one he told you was a revolutionary strategic partnership. Henderson picked it up, scowling. "We all know the deal fell through. Unfortunate, but it happens." "It didn't fall through," I said, my eyes locked on Mark, whose smirk was finally beginning to fade. "It was killed. Because Omnicorp was a shell company with over $90 million in hidden debt, on the verge of a federal investigation for fraud. Signing that deal wouldn't have been a partnership. It would have made Sterling Industries party to a criminal conspiracy. It would have destroyed us." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. And I haven't even gotten to the part about the $10 million kickback that was wired to a private offshore account in Mark's name 2 days before the scheduled signing. A stunned silence fell over the boardroom. All eyes were on Mark. The colour drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, sickly grey. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air. The damning evidence sat in the middle of the table, an unexploded bomb that had just been armed. I didn't give them time to process. I slid another set of documents across the table. "Or perhaps we could discuss Project Titan," I continued, my voice cutting through the silence. "Mark's pet project, the one he claimed had a 150% return on investment at last year's shareholder meeting. These are the reports he submitted to you." The top page showed a series of impressive upward-trending graphs. Then I placed a second, identical-looking report beside it. "And this is the real one, the one I compiled with Richard. Project Titan has not made a single dollar in 3 years. In fact, it has bled this company of over $200 million. The numbers you were shown were fabricated, a complete fiction designed to protect Mark's reputation." Henderson, the staunch family ally, slowly reached for the reports. His face, already grim, tightened as he compared the two. He looked up, not at me, but at Mark, and his eyes were filled with a cold fury. He had been made a fool of. "He couldn't have hidden losses of that magnitude alone," another board member muttered. "You're right," I said, delivering the final killing blow. "He couldn't have, which is why his mother helped him." I produced a third file, this one thinner. "These are internal transfer authorizations, moving funds from the Corporate Charity Foundation and the Employee Pension Fund to cover Project Titan's losses. All of them are signed by the former head of the board's Finance Committee." I let the words hang in the air for a beat. "Eleanor Sterling." The room erupted in a chorus of outrage and disbelief. Mark finally found his voice, a pathetic, strangled cry. "Lies! She's making it all up! These are doctored!" "Are they?" I asked calmly. Because Richard had every single one of these documents, along with your offshore bank records, authenticated by a forensic accounting firm 3 months ago. The originals are with Mr. Abernathy, along with a sworn affidavit from Richard detailing your decade of gross incompetence and criminal fraud. I stood up and walked to the head of the table, to the chairman's seat that Mark had so arrogantly occupied. He shrank back as I approached. I looked down at him, and for the first time, he looked truly small. This is what's going to happen. You are terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. My first act as chairwoman is to authorize a full-scale, independent audit of every transaction you and your mother have made for the last 15 years. I imagine the SEC and the IRS will be very interested in the findings. Mark stared at me, his face a mess of confusion and terror. The man who had entered this room like a king was now just a disgraced employee about to be fired. "You can't do this," he whispered, the words empty of their usual force. "I already have," I said. On cue, as Richard and I had planned with the head of security weeks ago, 2 large, uniformed guards entered the room. They stood on either side of Mark's chair. They didn't touch him, they just waited. The message was clear. Every board member, including Henderson, watched in stony silence. Not one of them would meet Mark's pleading gaze. His allies were gone. He was utterly alone. He stumbled to his feet, knocking his chair over in the process. As they escorted him out, a shell of a man, I addressed the remaining board members. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice resonating with newfound authority. Sterling Industries has been systematically mismanaged and defrauded from the inside. That ends today. The audit begins this afternoon. I am freezing all executive projects pending review. We will cooperate fully with all federal agencies to uncover the extent of this corruption. Our sole priority is to stabilize this company, restore its integrity, and protect our shareholders and employees. You are either with me or you can follow him out the door. No one moved. In their eyes, I no longer saw skepticism. I saw fear, respect, and a dawning realization that the company was finally in capable hands. That evening, I drove to the Sterling mansion. It was the house where I had been humiliated and scorned, the monument to Eleanor's power. I found her in the grand drawing room, surrounded by opulent furniture that had all been paid for by the company she'd helped Mark defraud. The frantic call from her son had clearly thrown her into a panic. Her perfect composure was gone, her face was pale, and her hands were shaking. "You!" she hissed as I entered. "How dare you, after all we did for you, taking you in? This is how you repay Richard's memory, by destroying his family?" "Destroying his family," I replied, my voice dangerously quiet. "You and Mark nearly destroyed his company. You made the last years of his life a living hell. You tried to steal his legacy. I'm not destroying his family, Eleanor. I am fulfilling his final wish. I'm saving his life's work from the 2 people he learned he could never trust." She started to ramble about lawsuits, about her connections, about how she would ruin me. I let her exhaust herself before I delivered the final crushing blow. "Your connections can't help you," I said flatly. "The mansion, the cars, the accounts, they're all corporate assets. They've been frozen as part of the investigation into financial misconduct. You will have to vacate the premises by the end of the week." She stared at me, aghast. "Vacate? Where will I go? What will I live on?" I looked at her, the woman who had once offered me a small stipend out of pity. "Richard provided for you in his will," I said. "He left you $100,000. I do hope it's enough.